The door was already open when I knew it shouldn't be. I stood frozen in the hallway, my fingers still wrapped around my car keys, the faint metallic click echoing louder than it should have in the silence of my house. It was just past midnight. I remembered checking the lock twice before I left, like I always did lately. Ever since the messages started. Ever since I began feeling like I wasn't alone, even when I was. The air inside felt wrong. Not colder. Not warmer. Just occupied. My breath caught as I pushed the door a few inches wider, the hinges whispering in protest, and for a second, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I was just tired. But then I saw it. The lamp in the living room was on. I never left it on. My heart began to pound, slow and heavy, like it was warning me instead of keeping me alive. Hello? My voice came out smaller than I intended, barely reaching past the entryway. No answer. Just the low hum of electricity and something else, something softer. A shift. A presence. I stepped inside anyway, because what else was I supposed to do? Pretend I hadn't seen it? Pretend I hadn't felt watched for the past 3 weeks? The door closed behind me with a quiet click that made my skin tighten. I didn't remember pushing it shut. I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow stretching longer than it should under the soft yellow light. That's when I noticed the picture frame on the floor. It had been on the shelf this morning. Straight. Perfect. Now it lay face down, like someone had picked it up and decided to put it back wrong. My chest tightened. He had been here. Not just watching from a distance. Not just messages left on my phone at 2 a.m. He had crossed the line. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling just enough to make unlocking it harder than it should be. No signal. Of course. A quiet sound came from deeper in the house. Not loud. Not sudden. Just a step. Measured. Intentional. My blood ran cold. I know you're here, I whispered, though I didn't know if I meant him or myself. The silence that followed was worse than any answer. It stretched, thick and suffocating, until I felt it press against my chest. And then, another sound. Not from the hallway. Not from the front door. From behind me. Close. Too close. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, expecting to see him. The man who had been sending photos of my own house back to me. The man who knew what time I left for work, what I wore, when I turned off my lights. But it wasn't him. At least, not the way I expected. Because the figure standing in the shadow near the door didn't move like someone surprised. He didn't rush. Didn't speak right away. He just stood there, tall, still, as if he had always been part of the room. Watching. Waiting. My pulse hammered in my ears as my eyes struggled to adjust, trying to make out his face, his expression, anything that would tell me what was about to happen. You shouldn't have come back tonight, he said quietly, his voice low and controlled, like he wasn't talking to me at all. Like I was just collateral in a situation I didn't understand. My stomach dropped. Because he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. Toward the dark hallway. Toward the place where I had heard the footsteps. Toward the man who had been hunting me. And suddenly, the fear inside my chest shifted into something else. Something colder. Because in that moment, I realized one terrifying truth. I hadn't walked into danger. I had walked into a room where danger had already been handled. My body refused to move, like something inside me understood before my mind could catch up that whatever was happening in this house was no longer about me. The man behind me took one slow step forward, and the air shifted with him, heavier, controlled, like he owned every inch of space without needing to prove it. I did not turn around again. I could not. My eyes stayed locked on the dark hallway ahead, where the silence had turned into something alive, something listening. "Come out," the man behind me said, his voice still low, almost calm, but there was something beneath it that made my chest tighten. Not anger. Not panic. Authority. The kind that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard it. A faint creak. A breath that was not mine. A figure shifted in the darkness, barely visible at first, like a shadow separating itself from the wall. My stomach dropped as he stepped forward just enough for the light to catch his face. I knew that face. Not personally. But I had seen it in reflections, in blurry photos sent to my phone, in glimpses that disappeared the moment I turned around. My throat went dry. "You should not be here," the man behind me continued, and this time there was something colder in his tone, something final. The stalker did not answer. He just stood there, eyes flicking between me and the man behind me, like he was trying to understand something that did not make sense to him. Like he thought he was the one in control until now. "This does not concern you," the stalker said finally, his voice uneven, lacking the quiet confidence he had in those messages, in those late-night calls where he never spoke but always stayed on the line. The man behind me let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like disappointment. "Everything that involves her concerns me," he said, and something in the way he said her made my heart skip, not faster, but heavier. I felt it then. Not fear. Not exactly. Something else. Something I could not name yet. I forced myself to turn, slowly, like if I moved too fast, everything would break. And for the first time, I saw him clearly. He was taller than I expected, dressed in dark clothing that looked simple until you noticed how perfectly it fit, how every detail seemed intentional. His expression was calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes were not on me. They were fixed on the man in the hallway with a focus so precise it felt like the rest of the world had stopped existing. "You have been watching her," he said, not a question, just a statement. The stalker shifted, uneasy now, his confidence cracking in ways I had never seen before. "You do not understand," he started, but the man behind me took another step forward, cutting him off without raising his voice. "I understand enough," he said. The room went still again, but this time it was different. It was not the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence before something inevitable. My hands were still shaking, my phone useless in my grip, but I realized something that made my breath catch. I was no longer the center of this moment. I was not the one being hunted anymore. I was the reason this was happening. The man finally shifted his gaze, just for a second, and looked at me. Not long. Not enough to read everything. But enough to make one thing clear. He had not just arrived. He had been here. Waiting. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. I did not realize I was holding my breath until the silence stretched so long it started to hurt. The man in the hallway shifted again, but this time it was different. Not cautious. Not curious. Cornered. His eyes flicked toward the front door, calculating distance, escape, options that no longer seemed to exist the way they had a few minutes ago. "You need to leave," he said, but the words sounded weaker now, like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. The man beside me did not react immediately. He did not rush, did not step forward again. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, like time itself moved differently for him. "You already made the wrong decision," he replied quietly, and there was something in the way he said it that made the air feel final, like a door closing somewhere I could not see. My heart pounded harder, but not with the same fear as before. It was something sharper now, more aware. Because I could see it clearly. The shift. The moment when control changes hands and never goes back. The man in the hallway laughed suddenly, but it was forced, hollow. "You think you scare me," he said, taking a step forward, trying to reclaim something that was already gone. "You do not even know who I am." The man next to me tilted his head slightly, like the question did not interest him. "I know enough," he said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The stalker stopped. Just for a second. But it was enough. Enough to show hesitation. Enough to show doubt. And in that second, everything became clear to me in a way that made my stomach drop. This was never about proving anything. It was never about intimidation or threats or fear. It was about certainty. The kind that does not leave room for argument. I took a small step back without realizing it, my shoulder brushing against the wall, grounding me in a reality that felt like it was slipping. The man beside me noticed. Not with his eyes. Not with a movement. Just noticed. "Stay where you are," he said softly, and this time he was speaking to me. Not commanding. Not harsh. Just certain. My body obeyed before my mind could question it. The stalker saw that too. His expression shifted, something darker creeping in, something desperate. "You do not get to decide that," he snapped, his voice rising for the first time, breaking the fragile control he had left. "She does not belong to you." The words echoed in the room, sharp and misplaced, like they did not fit the reality anymore. The man next to me went still. Not tense. Not surprised. Just still. And somehow that was worse. Because when he spoke again, his voice dropped even lower, quieter than before, but it carried something heavier than anything that had been said tonight. "No," he said, almost thoughtfully. "But you do not get to decide anything about her either." The room seemed to shrink around those words. The stalker opened his mouth, but nothing came out this time. His confidence had fractured completely, leaving behind something uncertain, unstable. I realized then that whatever hold he thought he had over me, whatever story he had built in his mind, it had just been erased. Not by force. Not by fear. But by someone who did not even acknowledge it as real. The man beside me took one final step forward, placing himself fully between me and the hallway, blocking the view, blocking everything. And for the first time since I walked into my own house, I could not see the man who had been haunting me. I could only feel the presence of the one who had been waiting. "This ends now," he said quietly. And I believed him. Not because of how he said it. But because something deep inside me knew it already had. The silence did not break the way I expected it to. There was no sudden movement, no raised voices, no chaos. It simply shifted. Like something unseen had been decided, and the rest of us were just catching up to it. I could not see the man in the hallway anymore, not with the way the stranger stood in front of me, blocking everything, but I could feel it. The tension that had been suffocating the room just minutes ago began to loosen, thread by thread, until it no longer felt like I was trapped inside it. A quiet sound came from the direction of the hallway. Not footsteps. Not resistance. Just movement fading away. My chest tightened as I tried to listen, to understand what was happening beyond the line I could not see, but the man in front of me did not move to reveal anything. He remained exactly where he was, steady, composed, as if the outcome had never been in question. Another second passed. Then another. And then, nothing. The house fell completely still. The kind of stillness that felt heavier than noise. I realized my hands were still shaking, my phone still useless in my grip, my mind trying to piece together something that refused to make sense. Slowly, carefully, I stepped to the side, just enough to see past him. The hallway was empty. Completely empty. The shadows were back where they belonged, stretched quietly along the walls, giving no indication that anyone had been standing there just moments ago. My breath caught. He was gone. Just like that. No explanation. No sound of the front door. No trace. It was like he had never been there at all. I stared at the empty space longer than I should have, waiting for something to move, something to prove that this was not real, but nothing changed. The man in front of me finally turned. His gaze met mine fully this time, steady and unreadable, like he was measuring something he already understood. Up close, the details became clearer. The sharp line of his jaw, the calm in his expression, the complete absence of urgency in the way he carried himself. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question caught me off guard, simple in a moment that felt anything but. I blinked, trying to find my voice. "No," I managed, though it came out quieter than I intended. He nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. No follow-up. No reassurance. Just confirmation. "Good," he said. And for some reason, the word settled something inside me instead of making it worse. I swallowed, my thoughts catching up all at once. "Who are you?" I asked, because nothing else made sense anymore. He studied me for a moment, not surprised by the question, but not quick to answer either. "Someone who does not like being ignored," he said finally, his tone even, almost casual, but there was something beneath it that I could not quite grasp. My brows pulled together slightly. "Ignored?" I repeated, confusion cutting through the fear. His gaze did not waver. "You changed your routine," he continued, like he was explaining something obvious. "You stopped taking the same route home. You stopped answering unknown numbers. You noticed him." My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" I asked, my voice tightening again. He held my gaze for a second longer, then looked past me briefly, scanning the room in a way that felt practiced. "Because I noticed him first," he said. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said tonight. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just certain. I felt my breath hitch as the realization settled in, slow and undeniable. He had not just shown up. He had not just intervened. He had been watching. Watching long enough to know patterns. Long enough to predict this night. Long enough to be here before it even happened. My fingers tightened around my phone. "Why?" I asked, barely above a whisper now. This time, when he looked at me, there was something different in his expression. Not softer. Not warmer. But closer to something human. "Because he was going to make a mistake," he said quietly. A small pause followed, just enough for the weight of that to sink in. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And I do not let mistakes reach you." My heart stuttered at the way he said it. Not protective. Not gentle. Just absolute. And in that moment, standing in my own house that no longer felt like it belonged to me, I realized something that made the air feel thinner. I had spent weeks thinking I was being watched by one man. I had been wrong. There had always been two. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. "I do not let mistakes reach you." They echoed in the quiet of the room, settling into the spaces where fear had been just minutes ago, replacing it with something far more complicated. I exhaled slowly, my grip on my phone loosening just enough to remind me that I was still holding it, still standing in the middle of my living room like I had forgotten how to exist normally. "You make it sound like you have been involved," I said carefully, watching him, trying to read something in his expression that would tell me where I stood in all of this. He did not answer right away. Instead, he moved past me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I felt the shift of air again, controlled, deliberate. He walked toward the fallen picture frame on the floor and bent slightly to pick it up, his movements precise, almost methodical. He glanced at the photo for half a second before placing it back on the shelf, exactly where it had been before, perfectly aligned like nothing had ever disturbed it. That small action did something strange to my chest. It was not comforting. It was not unsettling either. It was intentional. "Involved is not the word I would use," he said finally, straightening as he turned back toward me. "Aware is more accurate." I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. "Aware does not explain how you knew he would be here tonight," I replied, my voice steadier now, even if my thoughts were not. His gaze sharpened just slightly, not in a threatening way, but like I had asked the right question. Patterns, he said simply. People repeat them. Especially when they believe no one is paying attention. My stomach tightened again, but this time it was not from fear of the man who had been in my hallway. It was from the realization of how closely I must have been observed for someone to say that with such certainty. So you were watching him, I said slowly. He held my gaze. Yes. There was no hesitation. No attempt to soften it. Just the truth, delivered without decoration. I swallowed, my thoughts racing. And me? I asked, the question leaving my mouth before I could stop it. Something shifted in his expression again, subtle but undeniable. Not guilt. Not regret. Just acknowledgement. I needed to know what he was watching, he said. The answer was not what I expected, and somehow that made it worse. My heart picked up again, not out of panic, but out of something deeper, something that felt like standing on the edge of a truth I was not ready to understand. That does not make it better, I said quietly. It was not meant to, he replied. The honesty in that hit harder than anything else tonight. No excuses. No attempt to make it sound justified. Just a statement that existed whether I liked it or not. I looked away for a second, my eyes drifting toward the hallway that was now empty, silent, like it had erased everything that happened inside it. What happens now? I asked, because that was the only question that mattered anymore. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough that I could feel the weight of his presence more clearly, like it anchored the room in a way I did not understand. Now, he said slowly, you stop thinking this is over. My breath caught. He is gone, I said, almost instinctively, clinging to the only certainty I thought I had. His eyes did not soften. He is handled, he corrected. That is not the same thing. The distinction settled into my chest like a stone. I felt it immediately. The difference between temporary and permanent. Between absence and resolution. You are not safe because he is gone, he continued, his voice calm, steady, unshaken. You are safe because I am here. The words should have sounded reassuring. They did not. Not completely. Because there was something else inside them. Something that made my pulse slow instead of race. Something that felt less like comfort, and more like a boundary I had just stepped into without realizing it. The words settled between us like something solid, something that could not be stepped around or ignored. You are safe because I am here. I let out a slow breath, but it did not ease the tension in my chest. It only made me more aware of it. That sounds less like reassurance and more like a condition, I said quietly, my voice steady even though my thoughts were anything but. He did not react. The way most people would. No offense, no denial, no attempt to soften what he meant. He simply watched me, as if he had expected that response. It is both, he said after a moment. The honesty in that answer made something inside me shift again, not toward comfort, but toward clarity. At least he was not pretending. I folded my arms loosely, more to ground myself than to create distance. You do not even know me, I said. And yet you are standing in my house telling me what keeps me safe. His gaze did not waver. I know enough, he replied. The same words he had used before, but they carried more weight now, more meaning. My heart tightened slightly. You keep saying that, I murmured. What does that actually mean? For the first time since I had walked in, he paused longer than usual, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he moved again, this time toward the window, his attention shifting outside for a brief second before returning to me. It means I know how long you stay at work on Thursdays, he said calmly. I know you take the side streets when you feel like someone is behind you. I know you check your locks twice, even when you are already late. My breath caught, sharp and involuntary. He continued, not to intimidate, but because to him, these were just facts. I know you stopped opening your curtains in the morning. I know you started sleeping with your phone in your hand. Each word landed heavier than the last, not because they were wrong, but because they were precise. Too precise. I felt my pulse in my throat now, not racing, but present in a way I could not ignore. That is not normal, I said, though the words sounded weaker than I wanted them to. He tilted his head slightly. Neither is someone breaking into your house, he replied. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because he was not wrong. The situation itself had already crossed every line that defined normal. He stepped closer again, stopping just enough distance away to keep it deliberate. Controlled. You were adjusting, he continued. Changing your habits. Trying to stay ahead of something you could not see. His voice lowered slightly, not softer, just more focused. That only works for so long. I swallowed, my thoughts catching on that. Because I knew it was true. I had felt it slipping, that fragile sense of control I thought I had. So what? I asked, my voice quieter now, more measured. You step in and take over? He did not hesitate this time. I step in when necessary. The distinction was subtle, but it mattered. At least to him. I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting again toward the hallway, still empty, still silent. And tonight was necessary, I said. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. I nodded faintly, absorbing that, letting it settle somewhere I was not sure I liked. You said he is handled, I continued, my voice careful. What does that mean for me? His gaze locked onto mine again, steady and unwavering. It means he will not come back here, he said. My chest loosened slightly at that, but only for a second. Because I remembered what he had said before. That it was not the same as being over. And you? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Something unreadable flickered in his expression, quick and gone. I do not leave things unfinished, he said. The answer was not what I expected, and somehow that made it more real. I felt the weight of it settle in the room, in the space between us, in the quiet that followed. Because in that moment, I understood something that made my breath slow instead of quicken. The danger I had been running from had a pattern. It had limits. It had fear. The man standing in front of me did not. And for reasons I could not explain yet, that was the part that made me stay where I was instead of walking away. I should have told him to leave. That was the normal reaction. That was what any reasonable person would have done after finding a stranger standing inside their house, speaking in calm, measured sentences that revealed far too much. But I did not move. I did not tell him anything. Because something about the way he stood there, completely unshaken by everything that had just happened, made it feel like telling him to leave would not actually change anything. You talk like this is not over, I said slowly, my voice quieter now, more careful with every word. Like something is still coming. He did not answer immediately. His eyes shifted briefly toward the door, then back to me, as if confirming something only he could see. It is not over, he said. No hesitation. No softness. Just certainty. My stomach tightened again, that familiar feeling of control slipping just out of reach. You said he will not come back, I pressed, trying to hold on to something solid. He will not, he replied. The calm in his voice should have reassured me. Instead, it made the silence around his words louder. Then what is not over? I asked. He held my gaze for a long second, and for the first time, there was something almost deliberate in the way he chose his next words. The part where you think you can go back to how things were, he said. My breath caught slightly. Because I knew he was right before I even had time to argue. There was no going back to normal after this. Not after the messages. Not after tonight. Not after realizing how easily someone could step into my life without me even knowing. I looked away for a moment, my eyes tracing the familiar lines of my living room that suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else now. "So what?" I said quietly. "I just live like this." He stepped closer again, slow, controlled, stopping just enough distance away to keep everything intentional. "No," he said. "You stop living like you are alone." The words landed differently this time. Not sharp. Not overwhelming. Just heavy. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my thoughts catching on that single idea. Not alone. It should have felt comforting. It did not. Because it came with a presence I did not understand, a presence that had already crossed every boundary without asking. "You keep saying things like that," I murmured, my voice steady but lower now. "Like you have already decided something for me." His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened just slightly, like I had stepped closer to something he had been waiting for me to realize. "I decided something the moment he did," he said. My chest tightened. "And what was that?" I asked. He did not look away. "That he does not get access to you," he replied. The way he said access made my pulse slow instead of race, like the word itself carried weight beyond what it should have. "That is not your decision to make," I said, though it sounded less certain than I wanted it to. He did not argue. He did not correct me. He simply stepped even closer, just enough that I could feel the shift in the air again, that quiet, controlled presence that seemed to anchor everything around him. "It already was," he said softly. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just settled. Like something had shifted into place whether I accepted it or not. I searched his face for something, anything that would make sense of this, but all I found was that same calm certainty, the same quiet control that had been there from the moment I walked in. "Why me?" I asked finally, the question slipping out before I could stop it. His gaze held mine, steady and unwavering, and for a brief second, something almost unreadable passed through it. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Something deeper. "Because you noticed," he said. The answer did not make sense. Not fully. But something about the way he said it made my breath catch anyway. Because it sounded less like an explanation, and more like a beginning. "Because you noticed." The words did not leave me. They stayed in the air between us, quiet but persistent, like they were waiting for me to understand something I was not ready to see yet. I frowned slightly, my mind trying to connect something that felt just out of reach. "Noticed what?" I asked, my voice softer now, less defensive, more careful. He did not answer right away. Instead, he turned his head slightly, his attention shifting toward the window again, like he was listening to something beyond the walls of my house. It was subtle, but I caught it this time. The awareness. The constant calculation. "Most people ignore the feeling," he said finally. "The instinct that tells them something is wrong." His gaze returned to me, steady and precise. "You did not." I swallowed, my thoughts replaying the past few weeks in fragments. The moments I brushed off. The times I hesitated. Before unlocking my door. The nights I stood still in my bedroom, convinced I had heard something I could not prove. "That does not mean anything," I said quietly, though even as I said it, I was not sure I believed it. He shook his head once, a small, controlled movement. "It means you paid attention when it mattered," he replied. "That is the difference." The way he said it made it sound like something more than survival. Like it had value beyond just being careful. I let out a slow breath, my fingers loosening around my phone completely now, the tension in my body shifting into something else. Something steadier. "And that is why you are here?" I asked. "Because I noticed something was wrong?" He studied me for a second, and this time there was no distance in his answer. "It is part of it," he said. My brows pulled together slightly. "Part of it?" I repeated. He stepped closer again, slow, deliberate, closing the space between us just enough that I could feel the weight of his presence more clearly than before. Not overwhelming. Not threatening. Just there. Constant. You were not supposed to be easy to reach, he said. My heart stuttered slightly at that. What does that mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. His eyes held mine, unblinking, unwavering. It means he chose the wrong person, he replied. The words settled into my chest in a way I could not immediately process. Not comforting. Not exactly. But not frightening either. Something else entirely. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my thoughts, but there was something about the way he spoke, the way he framed everything, that made it feel like I had stepped into a version of reality where the rules were different. You keep talking about this like it was inevitable, I said. Like this was always going to happen. He did not deny it. It was, he said simply. My breath caught again. That does not make any sense, I murmured. He tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was measuring how much I could understand right now. It does if you know where to look, he said. The answer did not clarify anything. If anything, it made it more confusing. But something inside me shifted anyway. Because I realized I was no longer asking questions to make him leave. I was asking because I wanted to understand. And that realization made my chest tighten in a completely different way. You are not going to explain that, are you? I said quietly. For the first time, something almost like a faint trace of amusement flickered in his expression. Not enough to soften him. Just enough to make it real. Not tonight, he said. The words should have frustrated me. Instead, they made something else settle in my chest. A strange, quiet awareness that this moment was not ending the way I thought it would. That this was not just an interruption in my life. It was the beginning of something I had not chosen, but somehow stepped into anyway. He moved then, not away from me, but past me, his attention shifting toward the front door. You should not stay here tonight, he said calmly. My head snapped up slightly. What? I asked. He did not look back immediately. This place is no longer neutral, he continued. Too many variables have already changed. The words sounded clinical, detached, but the meaning behind them was anything but. My chest tightened again. You are telling me to leave my own house? I asked. He turned his head just enough to look at me over his shoulder, his gaze steady, certain. I am telling you that tonight changed more than you realize, he said. A small pause followed, just long enough for the weight of that to settle. And staying here would be a mistake. The word mistake echoed in my mind, heavier now than it had been before. Because I knew what he did with mistakes. I hesitated, my instincts pulling in two different directions at once. One telling me to stay, to hold on to something familiar. The other, listening to him. And that second instinct felt stronger than I wanted it to. Because deep down, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The moment I stepped into this house tonight, everything had already changed. I stood there for a second too long, my eyes drifting around the room like I was trying to memorize something that no longer belonged to me. The couch, the lamp, the picture frame he had placed back so precisely. Everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same. It felt observed. Changed. Like the version of safety I had built here had already been taken apart without me noticing. If I leave, I said slowly, my voice quieter than before, I am not coming back to things the way they were. It was not a question. He turned fully this time, his gaze settling on me with that same steady certainty that had followed every word he spoke. No, he said. No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. Just the truth, placed exactly where it needed to be. I nodded once, even though the movement felt heavier than it should have. Because I already knew that. I had known it the moment I saw the door open. The moment I realized someone had been inside my life without permission. I walked toward the small table near the entryway, setting my phone down for a second as I grabbed my keys again, the cold metal grounding me in a way nothing else had tonight. My hands were no longer shaking. That was the part that surprised me the most. Not because I felt safe, but because something inside me had adjusted. Shifted. Accepted that fear was no longer the only thing in control. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, glancing back at him. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, stopping just enough distance away to keep everything deliberate, controlled, the same way he had done all night. Somewhere that is not predictable, he said. Somewhere that does not follow the patterns he already knows. I exhaled slowly, my mind already running through options, eliminating them just as quickly. Friends. Family. Places I went often. All of them suddenly felt exposed in ways I had never considered before. That does not leave much, I said quietly. He watched me for a moment, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, unmarked card and holding it out toward me. I hesitated for half a second before taking it, my fingers brushing against his briefly, the contact quick but enough to make me aware of how steady he was compared to everything else tonight. I looked down at the card. No name. Just an address. My brows pulled together slightly. What is this? I asked. A place that is not on his list. He replied. I looked back up at him, searching his face for something that would tell me what this really meant, but all I found was that same quiet certainty. And you? I asked before I could stop myself. Are you going to be there too? The question hung between us, heavier than I expected. For a brief second, something shifted in his expression. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Just consideration. I will know if you arrive, he said. It was not the answer I asked for. But it was an answer. And somehow, it told me more than a simple yes or no ever could. I nodded slowly, folding the card into my palm like it carried more weight than it should. You really planned all of this, I murmured, more to myself than to him. He did not deny it. I planned for the possibility, he corrected. The distinction mattered to him. I could hear it in the way he said it. I grabbed my bag from the chair near the door, my movements steady now, deliberate in a way that mirrored his. When I turned back, he was already watching me, like he had been from the moment I stepped inside. If I do not go, I said, my voice quieter now, testing something I was not sure I wanted to hear. His gaze did not waver. Then I stay, he said. My breath caught slightly. And you make sure I am safe anyway? I asked. He took one step closer, closing the distance just enough to make the air shift again, that same controlled presence wrapping around the moment. No, he said softly. A small pause followed, just long enough for the weight of it to settle. I make sure you understand why that was not an option. The words did not sound like a threat. They did not need to. They were simply true. I held his gaze for a second longer, something unspoken passing between us, something I did not fully understand but could not ignore anymore. Then I turned, my hand wrapping around the doorknob, the same one I had walked through just minutes ago when